And so there's a lot of knots to untie. And it all has to do with what you think this word truth means. And in the deconstruction hashtag, they'll use the word truth and sometimes even capital T truth. But what they mean is that it's this internal sort of thing that you go with your gut, you go with your instincts, you follow your own heart. And that's because they assume that what you're going to find in there is good.
So somebody comes to you and says, I am deconstructing my faith. What on earth are you going to do? What if you're the one experiencing doubt? That's what we're going to talk about in today's show. So welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. I interview major thought leaders from many fields of influence to show how the truth changes everything. And you can find it wherever podcasts are found. If you do like what you hear and you haven't done this yet, please consider sharing the show with a friend. That helps more people find out about these conversations. So today's special, I have two guests with me, Alisa Childers and Tim Barnett. They've co-authored a book, The Deconstruction of Christianity, what it is, why it's destructive, and how to respond. Alisa is a popular speaker and author of a book called Another Gospel, which you probably have heard of. She's been published at the Gospel Coalition, Crosswalk, the Christian Post, and more. And Tim Barnett is a speaker and apologist for Stand to Reason with Greg Kokel, who's been on this show. He's known by many on the internet as Mr. B from Red Pen Logic. If you haven't watched those videos, they're great. Tens of thousands of people are watching these. It's an online ministry. It assesses flawed thinking on social media with reason and truth. We get them both at the same time. Please welcome Alisa Childers and Tim Barnett to the show. Alisa Childers, Tim Barnett, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast.
Great to be with you.
I don't know if we've had a chance to do a show where two people are on two different screens, and then I'm out here in Colorado, which I know makes you jealous. And listen, you've written this book on deconstructing Christianity, which is amazing. And the story of the two of you coming together to write this book on a topic that is so heartbreaking for so many people right now. Thank you for the work that you've done on it. I can't wait to have an extended conversation about it.
We're looking forward to it.
So yeah, we're grateful for the opportunity for sure.
Tim, I don't know if we've done a show together on the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. Alisa, we've done a show about your previous book on progressive Christianity. But I want to first of all just ask you how you teamed up to do a book like this. Alisa, how did you ever get the Red Pen Logic guy to work with you?
Well, this happened in an interesting way because we kind of both have a side to the story. So on my side of things, I was really deep into finishing my second book. And I was so excited to finish that book so that I could not write any more books for a while. I just wanted to not write another book. But at that same time, I did notice that the topic of deconstruction was being talked about in so many various different ways, especially among evangelical leaders. And I had a particular perspective on deconstruction because of my really intense faith crisis that I went through over 10 years ago that was facilitated by a deconstructed progressive Christian pastor. And so I watched a lot of my friends deconstruct. I had sort of followed the movement loosely online over the past several years. And then I started to see kind of this crop of evangelical leaders start to talk about deconstruction as if it could be a good thing or a healthy thing or a positive thing. And that was confusing to me because I thought, man, I mean, I wouldn't wish deconstruction on my worst enemy. Even my own faith crisis, which, by the way, I don't call deconstruction anymore. I did call it that in my first book. But that was agonizing. It was awful. And of course, the Lord turned it for good and used it for good. But I was anxious, not anxious. I had angst about that I saw some of these evangelical leaders talking about it that way. But then I started to see Tim post things on his social media about deconstruction. And I remember thinking, oh, Tim really gets what's happening. Like he gets what this deconstruction is all about. But I didn't really say anything to him that I can remember. I think I might have texted him and complimented one of his posts. But Tim, I'll let you tell now, kind of, you could pick it up from there.
Yeah, so around the same time, I was at this camp. In fact, I'd been prepping for a week-long series that I was going to be doing at a camp. I was the morning kind of Bible study guy. And I'd put together a series on deconstruction because deconstruction was such a big issue at that time. It continues to be, but it was, everyone was talking about it. And there was all these kind of celebrity Christians, usually musicians, that were coming out saying, I've deconstructed. So put together this material, 5 lessons, over, 5 or 6 hours of material. And halfway through this series, I remember sitting at the back of this chapel. It looked more like a barn, to be honest. It's one of the evenings. I'm thinking about my material a little bit. And it just occurs to me that someone needs to write a book on this issue. Now, of course, I'd been thinking a lot about it. And I saw that a lot of the people who were in deconstruction ended up in some kind of progressive Christianity. And of course, since Alisa had written the book on responding to progressive Christianity called Another Gospel, she would be perfect to write this book because it would be like the prequel to her book, right? This is what gets you. This is the transition. This is the vehicle that gets you to progressive Christianity. So I sent her a text saying, are you going to write this book? And she said, no, I'm too busy. I'm in the middle of like writing another book right now. And then I just kind of, mustered up the courage to text, you'll want to write it together. And then she wrote, let's talk. So and then that kind of launched this thing. She went to her publisher, and the rest is history. But that's literally how the whole thing went down.
Well, it's seamless. You take people seriously in the book who are in this deconstruction process, but you bring biblical truth to bear. You do it with fun stories, so we feel like we really get to know you. It's an art to be able to do that, and you did it really well. Tim, give us a definition of deconstruction that we can kind of all hang our hats on for the purpose of this discussion.
Sure. And by the way, this is like the $1 million question. Okay. In fact, Alisa and I have in these interviews will tell you that this was probably the hardest sentence in the entire book to write. And so, because we went back and forth on this, in fact, I would tell you that I changed my mind on deconstruction because there was a time where I thought you could add an adjective to deconstruction like healthy or good, and that would somehow baptize it. Okay. So you could have healthy deconstruction and unhealthy deconstruction, or you could have good deconstruction and bad deconstruction. And, but what we found when we were, did the deep dive, we really started doing our homework on this. What we found is that this healthy deconstruction, this idea of kind of using the Bible, and trying to kind of align your views with what Scripture teaches, it's just not out there. When you start to follow the accounts, the TikTokers, the Instagram posts, the YouTube videos. And so here's kind of where we landed on this issue. And each one of these words is important, okay? We said deconstruction is a postmodern process of rethinking your faith without requiring Scripture as a standard, okay? So the number of things going on there. First thing is it's not just like a destination. It's not a that, it's a how. Deconstruction is a how. It's a methodology. It's a process. And it's a certain kind of process. It's not a process that is truth-oriented. Truth isn't the goal. In fact, if you start to go down this rabbit hole, what you find is that there is no goal. In fact, that's what they'll tell you. Don't set a goal. Of course, that is a goal in itself. There's lots of self-refuting stuff that goes on in this movement. This is just one of them. What they say, that's why we call it a postmodern process, because truth really isn't the goal. And we could talk more about that. We also say it's not requiring Scripture as a standard. And this is true. They're not trying to reform their beliefs according to the Scriptures like you might see the Bereans do, right? They search the Scriptures to see if these things are so. They're using the Scriptures. Or what Martin Luther did. He's trying to kind of decipher what is actually biblical and what isn't. And so we got to throw out, we got to rethink, get rid of, in many cases, the stuff that's not biblical. And there's lots of that stuff in the church, no doubt. But what the difference is, Luther, he had his Scriptures as the standard. He had the Bible as his standard. And that's what we would encourage. So when we look at this movement, we see these kind of two key elements: postmodern process, not truth oriented, It's more like self-oriented. And then get rid of the scripture as a standard because I become the standard, the authority of truth.
Yeah, and I can see, Alisa, how that fits exactly into the writing that you've done. Your book, Speak Your Truth and Other Lies. Did I get the title?
Yeah, Live Your Truth and Other Lies.
And Other Lies. Yeah, that once you forfeit the idea that there is a standard, there's something out there, even if it's hard to find, that we can be moving toward. Sort of a magnetic north that guides the compass. Instead, we're going to turn the compass around, point it toward us, and think that we're going to be found. That's one of the core myths that you addressed in that book. But I wonder if it even how that affected the writing process, because I'm sure every single person you talk to who said they're deconstructing their faith said that, well, this is my own personal journey. You can't define that. You can't tell me what I'm going through. So how do you frame out the point that you're making in the book, which we know is there, but each person you talk to is going to deny it?
Right. And this is so fascinating to me because back when I wrote Another Gospel, I actually described my faith crisis as deconstruction in the book. And I said it's something like, it's when you dissect your beliefs, but when you put your beliefs back together, they don't really look like the beliefs you started with. And that's what I thought it was. And I thought I had deconstructed. But when I started to talk online about deconstruction, deconstructionists would come into the comments and say, you didn't deconstruct because you still hold to toxic theology. And what is so interesting and ironic about this to me is that, like you mentioned, they'll deny that, you can't tell them what their journey is like, but they were very quick to tell me what mine was like, which really helped, I think, in my own thinking, get to the bottom of what this thing really is. And that's actually why I don't call what I went through deconstruction anymore, because I actually agree with them. I'm trying to take them seriously about what they're calling deconstruction. And as Tim mentioned, they say there's no goal, but there really is one goal in deconstruction, and that is to leave behind toxic theology. And this is where that sort of truth stuff comes in, because everything is assumed to be toxic that would be any kind of an objective statement outside of yourself that you would have to yield to if you don't like it. For example, not just ethics, of course, that's going to be in the conversation, sexuality, things like that. But even being told you're a sinner is considered to be abusive. And this is where truth is so important, because what that reveals is that they actually don't think it's true that you're a sinner, or they don't think you can know these things. And that is a very postmodern approach, because what we point out in the book is that if you walk into a room and you see somebody laying on the floor unconscious and somebody else is pounding on their chest, well, everybody would agree that's abusive, unless the person laying on the floor has just had a heart attack and the person that's standing over them is trying to save their life with CPR. And it's the same exact event, but it's the truth of the diagnosis of what's actually happening that helps us decide whether or not the act itself is abusive or actually life-giving or healthy. And there's another one that I think maybe Tim had come up with, where you walk into a room and there's a man standing over another man with a knife in his chest. And well, that's horrible. That's abusive. That's terrible. Unless the truth of the situation is that the man holding the knife is a surgeon and he's performing life-saving surgery on the person who is on the table. And so that's where truth is just not really invited into the conversation in the deconstruction hashtag, because it's really just whatever you feel harmed by or you feel abused by. And the tough thing about this is that I acknowledge that in a lot of the stories we heard, there is legitimate abuse that they went through. And so you can have, the conversation can span between maybe somebody who was molested by their youth pastor claiming abuse, which is abuse, of course. And then you have somebody saying, well, I was told I'm a sinner and that is abusive. And it caused me to view myself that way. And that's abusive. And so there's a lot of knots to untie. And it all has to do with what you think this word truth means. And in the deconstruction hashtag, they'll use the word truth and sometimes even capital T truth. But what they mean is that it's this internal sort of thing that you go with your gut, you go with your instincts, you follow your own heart. And that's because they assume that what you're going to find in there is good. I'll leave you with this one example from Michael Gungor, who is from the band Gungor. Lots of Christians have sang their songs in their church services, and he and his wife, Lisa, deconstructed. And a few weeks ago on Instagram, somebody asked Michael Gungor, where can I find absolute truth? And he made a short little video, and he said the only place you can find absolute truth is within yourself. And I think that perfectly describes what we see in the deconstruction hashtag.
This is so clarifying. And, when you phrase it that way, it's easy to see that not everybody's experience is the same. There are some people who've been genuinely hurt. They've been abused. They're in a lot of pain. And then there are other people who, are self-absorbed whiners. This is true everywhere, really, in life. But we owe a lot of this discussion to Francis Schaeffer, the idea of the two-story truth. And Alisa, when you're giving those examples, I'm recalling that from the book, that people assume that there is a level of life that's based on facts. You might believe you have your own truth, but you're still going to not drive headlong into somebody else at 60 miles an hour.
Right.
But then you have this other story, which is all about you. It's personal, it's romantic, it's your own feelings and so forth. And Francis Schaeffer's point was that's a false distinction. You can't distinguish the secular and the sacred in that way. Right? Like you wouldn't say to somebody who's having a heart attack, well, how do you feel about that? Let's talk about your feelings. You'd ask them how they feel just because, are you going to make it? We got to get you to the hospital. But there's an objective process that you put somebody through if something like that's happening that people assume doesn't apply to the feelings that they have. Have I got that about right? Tim?
That's right. We actually use that as an example in the book because my dad did suffer a massive heart attack, and doctors saved his life. And they didn't go to him and say, well, let's let your heart decide kind of thing, like a Disney princess movie or something. No, and excuse the pun there, but they really had a methodology. Here's what we're going to do with stents and all this other stuff. Here's our procedure because we know it corresponds with reality. Jeff, it became really clear, and you're going to know this from working with young people, that many young people have been so influenced by relativism and postmodernism, the idea that there just is no truth. There is no objective truth. And so when we go to churches, sometimes we'll do a truth test, with young people especially. We'll put up claims like Coke tastes better than Pepsi. And we'll say, is that like an objective truth claim or a subjective truth claim? Is it like insulin? Like you need insulin if you have type 1 juvenile diabetes? Or is it like ice cream, which is just about personal preferences? And of course, when it comes to Coke tasting better than Pepsi, that's ice cream. But there are other claims out there, like 2 + 2 = 4. Well, that's an objective truth claim. That's insulin. The problem is when we do this test in churches and we get to Jesus is the only way of salvation. You make this claim that is like a religious kind of claim. Everyone yells ice cream, or you say abortion is wrong. Well, what kind of claim is that? That's a moral claim. They yell ice cream because they have moved morality and religion up into the second story. So it's not just the secular world that's done this. It's happening in our churches. Like we have not done a great job showing that all truth is God's truth, this kind of thing. Instead, we've allowed them to have this bifurcation, this lower story truth and upper story truth. And hey, all that stuff in the upper story, like my favorite place to sit in a movie theater, or my favorite kind of cheese, or my favorite ice cream. I'm going to put religion and morality up there. And then when it comes to, and think about that. If Christianity is now in the upper story, then how do you rethink your faith? Well, you're going to do deconstruction, because in deconstruction, that's a postmodern process. That's where you decide and you can label things as toxic or not. And guess what? You're the man upstairs. You're the one who's in charge of that kind of truth, right? So this is where, Schaeffer for us was a huge key. I had been reading Schaeffer around the same time, just going back and looking at some of his work. And it was like, wait a second. I think Schaeffer's speaking directly to our current moment right now with deconstruction. And it seemed like it was kind of piecing it all together. And we're hoping that helps the rest of the church see what's really going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Alisa, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. At Summit, as you know, because you're both speakers at Summit Ministries, we treat postmodernism as a worldview. It is an identifiable pattern of ideas that has an identifiable theology, philosophy, ethics, biology, psychology, sociology, law, politics, economics, history. But postmodernism has its own way of reconciling the secular and the sacred, like collapsing that distinction by saying that there is no lower story, that everything is, even math. You know, the example of 2 + 2 = 4, that's not going to be a cogent example if if you're in Oregon and you're paying attention to that little booklet they put out on how to teach math without being racist. Right. I mean, and you've seen this, I'm sure. It's actually out there. So there are no knowable facts. So everything is just a matter of your perception or your cultural experience. So that's what makes this such a complicated thing now. Like, how do you get people who are in the deconstruction process to even acknowledge that there is truth that exists outside of themselves?
Well, I have found that in discussions with people, most people are influenced by postmodernism, but they haven't gotten all the way to the math is racist thing yet.
Okay.
So they live as though there is a bottom story, like especially people in the deconstruction hashtag, because they will have no problem saying objectively that the church is evil, that evangelicalism is a cult, that purity, teaching kids to wait until they get married to have sex is oppressive. I mean, they will make all sorts of objective claims about truth. And yet I think it's just they don't realize it. I don't think they realize. Some do. In fact, I've had many people in my comment section openly embrace postmodernism and say, we do want to make a postmodern correction to, and what they'll often say is that Christians like us are just stuck in the rationalism of the Enlightenment. In fact, Tim and I met privately via Zoom with several deconstructionists in preparation for writing the book. And one of them, that was the first thing they said was, don't you think you're just kind of influenced by the rationalism of the Enlightenment, And so it's a tough beast to kind of wrestle with, because on one hand, they say things like, they're just assuming that Christian ethics is oppressive, and they're using all of these words that are moral words that are being led from their own perspectives and not from an objective standard outside of themselves, because they can't root their morality in anything objective outside of themselves. But I think what it is the influence of postmodernism has caused them to get to the point where they do think that religion and morality are more like your favorite flavor of ice cream or your favorite color or what you might choose, style of clothing you might like to wear, what style of movies you like to watch. It's so when they don't think that objective claims about morality and spirituality can even be known, they're immediately suspicious of the Christian who comes along claiming to know what these things are. And so that's why, many of our listeners probably have had interactions on social media where they'll make some sort of an objective claim like that. And let's just say, like, hell is a real place. And then somebody comes into the comments and says something like, well, the church just invented the doctrine of hell to control people with fear. Notice that there's not even a conversation happening of like, is this actually real? Does the doctrine of hell line up with reality? Is this something that is actually true in the world? That's not the question, because they don't even think anybody could know these things. So it immediately goes to motive. Oh, well, the church must just be teaching that because they're trying to prop up their institution of power. They're just trying to keep you in the fold. They have to use fear tactics to make sure you don't leave so they don't lose their power. And so it's just this assumption that truth claims when it comes to morality and religion are really just power grabs. And that is really how they are seen in the deconstruction hashtag.
I remember, I want to hear, I'd love to, this is so fascinating to me. I get lost in the conversation. I remember, in the 1980s when I was in college debate, and we would have to travel sometimes by airplane to go to debate tournaments, and every airport we went to, Los Angeles, Boston, whatever, there was some cult and they're promoting its thing. And, Lyndon LaRouche, which is a political cult, which most people have never even heard of. The Moonies, the Hare Krishna, everybody was there. And you could talk to them. You could go to Boston and talk with them about the Red Sox and have a normal conversation. As soon as you start addressing the stuff that their cult is about, it's like the different person emerges. There's no longer they're seeing everything through an oppressor versus oppressed mindset that they've been given. And that's actually built its own defensive layer around it. If anybody questions this mindset, they're an oppressor, right? So it explains the explanation, which explains the explanation. And so but some point you've got to be able to break the spell in this. How do you do it? Tim, you're working with kids a lot. What do you find?
Yeah. Well, here's what doesn't work many times. And I've come to realize this through the trial and error process, but oftentimes we think apologetics is going to be the answer. Okay. And I think in many, many cases, if the person cares about what's actually true, then offering evidence and reasons for something being true, well, that's going to be totally appropriate. But there are other times where you're talking to someone who has been so influenced by postmodernism, and they maybe don't even know the word. They don't know who Derrida is, but they certainly are using his playbook. You offer apologetics and they shrug their shoulders, like, who cares? Or you're just, well, that's exactly what you would say because you're a straight white man or something. Like they pull the whole, what C.S. Lewis called Bulverism. Forget about truth. Let's just go right to motivations, right? Of course you would say that because, you're motivated by whatever. So, and my fear is that this has happened in the past where people have tried apologetics in this way. And what they end up concluding is that apologetics doesn't work. And my advice would be, no, apologetics does work. It just works where it's intended to work. Okay, when it's appropriate to work.
Yeah.
Okay, so if someone is drinking from this fountain that you're talking about, the postmodern drinking water, okay, well, what do we do? I think there's a couple things. One is because people are made in the image of God and they live in God's world, there's going to be times where, as Alisa had just kind of described, things are not going to match up with what they're saying. So they can't live out exactly what they're saying. There are times when they're going to make a truth claim that they don't just believe is true for me, but it's true for everybody. And in those moments, what we can do is point it out. Just point to it and say, well, hold on a second. A moment ago, you were just saying that it's all just, there is no right or wrong. There is no, good or true. It's just whatever's up to the individual. Then, okay, well, what about this case that you just described? And what I find is that inconsistency, that kind of what my boss, Greg Kokel, he would call like a practical kind of suicide, that like the statement can't work practically. It ends up refuting itself in your actions and how you are behaving. So this would be a tactic that one could use when in conversation with a deconstructionist who's kind of bought into the whole deal. Just watch them and listen to them. And eventually what you're going to see is a mismatch. And that's just because they are truly made in the image of God. They cannot help but live as if there is an objective morality and as if truth really is a feature, a fact of reality, because it is. And then just expose it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to approach this as a parent right now because you're both parents. So your child comes to you and says, but I'm having real doubts, Mom. I'm having real doubts. Alisa, walk us through that a little bit. I know you help students at Summit on this a lot, but I just love, because not everybody who's watching or listening gets to go to Summit and hear this kind of instruction.
Yeah. Well, and my own kids have gone through their own doubts. I remember for at least 2 years, my son was really struggling with what we would call in apologetics the problem of evil. And for him, it was the natural disasters. How could God be all powerful and all loving and let these natural disasters happen all over the world where people are dying and suffering? And I mean, he was like 9 or 10 years old when he was struggling deeply with that. And he would kind of come in and out of, I don't know if I'm a Christian. I don't think I am a Christian. I am a Christian. I'm not a Christian. And I think one of the most important things we can do, especially in the culture that we're living in today, is give our kids some space to wrestle through these things, because these are things that I didn't personally wrestle through these things when I was younger, but I also think that's because there was limited information available. I mean, I knew that the neighbors next to me were Catholic because they had a bunch of kids and they ate fish on Fridays. And I knew that my neighbors to the other side were not Christians. And so we were going to, share the gospel with them as much as we could. But that was about it. I mean, I don't even know what the lady down the street believed. And I would have had to have gone and asked her and gone to her church to find out what they teach. And yet now we have these screens that everything is coming in. And even when we shelter our kids and shield our kids as best we can, it's still coming in because you can't even take them to a store to buy clothes where they're not going to be inundated with queer theory and all of the, the spectrum of crazy ideologies that are out there. And so I think giving our kids space for that is really important, not just trying to fix them on the spot, but letting them wrestle through these things with guidance and discipleship from us. So what I did with my son when he was going through that is I let him know that it's okay to feel that way. It's actually a sign that you're really trying to work things out. And I really respect that. And I think that's a really good thing for you to do. And then give him some encouragement to keep truth at the forefront, to ask him certain questions to be thinking about. For example, does the fact that, let's say God does allow these natural disasters for some reason he knows that we don't know, does that mean he's not real? Does that mean that Christianity isn't true? Or is that something else? Is it maybe that we're struggling to trust him? Maybe we need to learn a little more about his character and kind of leading our kids in an environment of discipleship. But I have tried to do that with both of my kids, where I'm not trying to rush them through the process, because they're asking different questions. I remember when I first read about, Moses crossing the Red Sea with the Israelites, and my questions were so different than the questions my kids asked. My questions were, what was that like? Was it like the movie where you could see fish on the sides, and how dry was the ground, and all these questions? Whereas the first thing my daughter said when we read that, when she was about 7 years old, was she said, did that really happen? And those are two very different types of questions that people are asking. So I think parents, we're going to have to really equip ourselves, first of all, to be able to help our kids with their questions. But I also think that a lot of parents feel really overwhelmed. Don't feel overwhelmed, because you can learn along with your kid. Just, if you don't know where to start with your kid's biggest question about God. Just ask him that. What is your biggest question about God? And then if you don't know the answer to it, go on a journey to learn the answers. There's so many amazing resources out there. And then you can help disciple your kids in these kinds of questions too. But I think one of the most important things we can do as Christian parents is read the actual words of the Bible with our kids. Tim and I have seen in the deconstruction hashtag how often somebody will say, oh, I know the Bible front and back, inside and out, sideways, this way, that way. I know every word of the Bible. And then they'll say something like, and the entire Christian religion is based on child sacrifice. And you want to just say, like, but do you really know the Bible back in, know? And so I think what we're seeing, or what I've observed at least in that hashtag, is that there are a lot of people who didn't really engage with the Bible when they were younger. Then they started to engage with it, but they started to engage with it from a heavily skeptical environment of, memes and verses taken out of context. And so they're working from that perspective to try to get to the text, rather than letting the text tell you what God is like and what he's all about. And that'll help you handle the skeptical questions when they come. And I'll end with this one example. I read through almost the whole Bible by the time I was 12, just on my own. I loved the Bible as a kid. I remember just crossing off each book as I would read it. And I went back and read many books many times as a young teen. So I had that now I didn't know how to interpret it properly. I wasn't given some of those tools till much later. But I knew what the Bible said, and I knew the overarching narrative of the Bible. And I knew God's nature and character from the Bible. So when I started hearing these claims like, oh, well, God is different in the Old Testament than he is in the New Testament, that is honestly, of all the doubts I went through in my life, that was not one of them. Because I was like, no, he's not. Actually, Jesus can be quite severe. And actually, the God of the Old Testament is incredibly patient with Israel and even surrounding nations, withholding his judgment for over 400 years before the Canaanite conquest. I mean, you see the mercy of God in the Old Testament, and you see the severity of Jesus in the New. So I think having the Bible in our bones and really helping our kids have it in their bones is going to help maybe with some of that stuff that they're going to face on social media later.
And Jeff, I would just want to add to this that when we're talking about doubt and deconstruction, like we're warning about deconstruction, but we do not see doubt as the exact same thing as deconstruction. Lots of people using these as synonyms. Lisa and I, we welcome doubts and questions, and we recognize that people can question and doubt towards God. What we're saying about deconstruction is it's the kind of process that doesn't go towards God, it goes away from God. So when as we're encouraging our young people, we want to be saying, look, there is a better way. Absolutely. Like, go through this process, ask your questions, express your doubts. Of course, we know that it's really suppressed doubts that are the problem. It's doubt in the face of silence that's the problem, not doubt in itself. Often doubts can actually lead to a much stronger faith at the end of the day. So let's get all those on the table, as Alisa just described, and see if we can answer some of those.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, there's a key quote in the book where you quote Kara Powell and Stephen Argue, who would be everybody in youth ministry would know who those two are, because they write on sticky faith and all different kinds of things. But the quote stuck in my mind, it's not doubt that's toxic to faith, it's silence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is, for sure. And by the way, the Bible is full of doubters. And we, in the book, we talk about John the Baptist as an example. And what does he do? He expresses his doubt to his community, to his disciples that go to talk to Jesus. Are you the one? Are you the guy, the Messiah, or should we look for another? So there's our example right there. And Jesus doesn't chastise John the Baptist for that. In fact, he turns to his own disciples and says, among those born of women, there's arisen no one greater than John the Baptist. So he pays them this compliment, even though he has just doubted. And by the way, he answers his doubt with evidence. You know, the blind are seeing, the deaf are hearing, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, such a great example. Tim, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one. And by the way,
Sure.
I love the way you say the word doubt as a Canadian. Doubt.
That's when it comes out. That's the only time I was at a conference in Canada recently, and half the people were there like, I didn't know you were Canadian. And I'm like, you guys don't hear the accent? Okay.
Oh man. Let's, so a lot of people who are, I guess, it's possible you could say you're going to deconstruct your faith really at any age, but I'm guessing one of the pieces of evidence that this is a particular kind of phenomenon is it's mostly people who are in their 20s or early 30s that I've seen go through it. Now, I'm not saying people can't, they don't have this experience when they're 40s or 50s. I'm not trying to invalidate that. I'm just saying if it's particular to a particular generation, a particular generational cohort, then you can't ignore that. You got to do something with it. So there are probably a lot of parents, maybe they're in their 50s now, they've got kids who are in their 20s, and their kids are, even confrontational sometimes. How do you handle that with an adult child? And I'm asking you because I know that you work with a lot of young adults who are in that cohort.
Yeah. I think that, there's a couple of things we could say. And we offer a number of pieces of advice actually in the last third of the book, and actually on a chapter called Advice. And we work through a number of different scenarios, but in the one you've just offered, we think it's key to do some triage. Okay. We want to find out where your son or daughter, whoever the student is, find out where they're at. Okay. And so this may mean kind of asking them even directly about their own, if they're describing a deconstruction or doubt or whatever, just getting more information about that. But if they're really hostile, if they're really more like a mocker than a seeker, and I think the Bible uses these categories, there's mockers and there's seekers, it may be beneficial for you not to try to win arguments. Okay, that's not going to be your goal. Your goal, if you're doing some triage, so you guys know how triage works. If someone has a paper cut, but they also have a stab wound, the doctors are going to go to the stab wound first. Well, in this case, the stab wound may be the relationship, and that's what needs to be maintained. Okay. So I'm going to do whatever it takes to maintain the relationship. Of course, as apologists, we care about truth, but what the studies show is always truth in the context of relationship. So as best you can, and by the way, this isn't always possible. There's lots of examples, and we've talked to parents and heard the stories. They're tragic, where adult children will not even talk to their parents anymore because they hold what they call toxic beliefs. So here's my no contact letter. I don't want anything to do with you. That happens, and it's sad when it does. But as best as you are able to, what we would encourage is try to just leave the theology arguments aside for a second and just try to maintain the relationship. I think many of us think, well, if I just take you out for coffee, then we'll get all this straightened out. We'll fix your theology, right? But likely their theology didn't break over coffee, so you're not going to fix it over coffee, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it likely, if this person really is, as that you just described, antagonistic, they're hostile, this isn't like they watched one YouTube video. They've probably been going through this for months, maybe longer, where I just talked yesterday. I talked to a father. He has 5 children, and all of them had what he called deconstructed away. And one has returned, and he's on fire for the Lord, just got baptized, I think, in the last few years. But he said that there was one of his children is really hostile, and how it started was watching a YouTuber. He said the YouTuber's name was Mr. Atheist. Now, I'd never heard of that YouTuber before, but following Mr. Atheist for years, and they didn't know. The parents had no idea. And then boom, it all started coming out in these really hostile conversations, these really antagonistic conversations. And they just had to kind of shelve some of those and just focus on the relationship. And so that would be the key in that situation. Maybe Alisa has more to say about that.
Well, I was just going to say, your friend who's deconstructing knows why you're calling for coffee, and she doesn't want to have coffee with you. You know, she knows exactly why you're inviting her to coffee. I mean, that was well done, Tim. I think I will give you one little personal application, or not personal to me, but personal to somebody that I met. I met a man at a conference who came up to me he was so desperate. You could hear the desperation in his voice, the tears in his eyes. He and his wife had been through 3 in a row really horrific experiences of church abuse. And his wife was just leaving the faith. She had pretty much deconstructed by this point, obviously didn't want to go to church. And he was just so desperate because he just didn't know what to do. And I gave him the advice that we give in the book. And I advised him to back off a little bit when it comes to conversations about religion, about Christianity. Back off of that and just love your wife. Be exactly what the kind of husband that the Bible tells you to be. Lay down your life for her. Love her as Christ loved the church. It's okay to not argue with her about theology all the time. Just try to maintain the relationship. And at that point, he wasn't even sure if he was going to be married much longer, if she was going to be leaving him or what was going on. Well, I ended up seeing him a year later. And he came up to me and reminded me of who he was and the story. And I remembered the story. And he said, I want you to know that advice saved my marriage. We are still married. Wow. And I said, well, how's your wife doing? He said, well, she's still deconstructing, but she has softened a little bit. I think he might have even said that they pray together once in a while. But he definitely said, because before I gave him that advice, he was just desperate to try to change her mind and constantly bringing up these apologetics and all sorts of stuff. And I've had a lot of people tell me that since they got the book, they've implemented that, and it's been really helpful to just try to stay, maintain the relationship first. And now, one thing I think is really important to say is that we should never compromise our beliefs. We should not be forced to affirm something about somebody that is sinful or wrong or untrue. And if that's going to break the relationship, if you being disobedient, if the only way for you to save a relationship is to be disobedient to Christ, well, you can't save the relationship then. Because at that point, I can't remember, I saw somebody say this online. I don't want to take credit for it because it's so good. But if that's the case, then that relationship has become an idol. And it's easy, especially for parents, to make our relationships with our kids an idol. So obviously we can't compromise our own faith, but we can try to maintain the relationship as best we can, back off a little bit with the theological discussions, live the beauty of the gospel out in front of them, let them see the peace of Jesus in our lives, because I assure you, Tim and I can both tell you that we have been to the bottom of this rainbow, this hashtag, and there's no pot of gold down there. It's a very toxic place. It's very cultish, I think, and it's like a social contagion. It's very dark. It's very cynical. It's very sarcastic. And I truly believe that you can model the peace of Jesus in your life, of what it is like to be a Christian who is indwelt by the Holy Spirit, and you have the fruits of the Spirit in your life. And I think that's going to begin to look really different as they travel further down this road and see how toxic and dark it is for themselves. And so that's where I think we do have a lot of hope, is that this thing cannot sustain itself. this deconstruction, we've watched people just get too overcome with the negativity, and they have to like shut down their platforms because for their mental health, because it's just so dark. So keep hope, keep hoping. You can always pray in the meantime. You're not powerless. You can pray.
Yeah. Yeah. What you're talking about is it's just the specific cultural application of, I was thinking of 2 Timothy chapter 2. We gently instruct in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, that they will come to their senses and escape the trap of the devil who's taken them captive to do his will. But you've given such good advice on this show and given us hope. Thank you for both of those things. And thank you for the book, Deconstructing Christianity, for the work that you both did on it. And we'll have that in our Summit Ministries bookstore this summer. And I just think there are a lot of people who are exactly what you said. They're starting down this road, but they haven't gotten to that cynical, dark place yet that represents unhealth. They're still prepared to learn and to grow. And at root, that's the kind of young adult that we're going to be able to, see, get outside of themselves and be a blessing to others.
Man, that's great.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks. It was fun.
Thank you to my guests, Alisa Childers and Tim Barnett, for coming on the show today. If you want more resources to help you navigate doubt, deconstruction, and other tough questions, you can head over to summit.org/resources for tons of free content. That, and check out the book, The Deconstruction of Christianity. This is one of the really, really significant books of our time. I know it's hard to read a lot with everything we have going on, but this one's worth it. Thanks. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Dr. Jeff Show podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. Summit equips and supports the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. If you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview as a student or reach the next generation as an educator, church leader, or parent, head over to summit.org/resources to find out about the programs, the articles, the videos, the ebooks, and more that we offer. Also, if you're looking for more great podcasts that will build your faith and inspire you, our friends at Edify have what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. Download it at edify.app, spell EDIFI. And then you can also search for it in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.